The humid air of Okinawa clung heavy, thick with the scent of iodine and fear. Sergeant Thomas Miller, a medic hardened by island hopping, stared at the Japanese prisoner, a woman barely clinging to life, her uniform torn, her breath shallow. Orders were clear: conserve resources, especially for the enemy. But as her eyes fluttered, a silent plea in their depths, Tommy knew he had a choice. 8 minutes. That's all she had, and he was about to defy every warning to give her a chance. The field hospital on Okinawa was a symphony of suffering, a canvas of canvas tents baking under the relentless Pacific sun. The air, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the cloying sweetness of gangrene, hummed with the drone of flies and the distant thud of artillery. Sergeant Thomas Miller, Tommy to his unit, moved with a practiced, weary efficiency through the rows of cots, his hands, calloused from farm work back in Iowa, now deftly bandaging wounds and administering morphine. He was a combat medic, trained not just to patch up GIs, but to make impossible choices under fire. Tommy had joined up, driven by a simple, unshakable belief in doing what was right, a value instilled by his Depression-era parents, who taught him that every life held inherent worth. His medical training, though rudimentary by civilian standards, was thorough, emphasizing triage and stabilization, a relentless focus on preserving life. He'd seen horrors that would haunt him forever, but he'd also seen the resilience of the human spirit, both American and, occasionally, even Japanese. A fresh wave of casualties arrived, a grim procession from a recent skirmish. Among them, a small group of Japanese prisoners of war, their faces etched with defiance and exhaustion. One stretcher carried a woman, her slight frame almost swallowed by the canvas. Her uniform, a tattered tunic, was soaked crimson, a gaping wound in her abdomen. Her breathing was a ragged gasp, her pulse a faint flutter beneath Tommy's fingers. She was young, perhaps early 20s, and clearly dying. "Leave her, Miller," barked Lieutenant Davies, his voice tight with the strain of command and the pervasive animosity towards the enemy. "We've got our own boys bleeding out, no resources for Japs, especially not one this far gone. She's a lost cause, and frankly, a waste of good plasma." The sentiment was echoed by the weary glances of other medics, their faces hardened by months of brutal combat and the ingrained propaganda that dehumanized the enemy. Military orders were explicit: prioritize American and Allied wounded. Enemy combatants, particularly those with critical resource-intensive injuries, were often left to their fate if their survival seemed unlikely or if resources were scarce. It was a brutal reality of war, a pragmatic calculus of survival. Tommy felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut, his oath. His very being screamed against it. He looked at the woman, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes, though clouded with pain, still held a flicker of life, a desperate will to survive. He saw not an enemy combatant, but a human being in extremis. The wound was severe, likely a perforating injury to the bowel, leading to massive internal hemorrhage and septic shock. Without immediate intervention, she would be dead within minutes. He had seen enough to know the signs. He also knew he possessed the skills, however limited, to potentially save her. He had a plasma unit, some sterile gauze, and a basic surgical kit. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was a shot. "Sir, with all due respect," Tommy began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "she's got a chance. A small one, but a chance. I can stabilize her. Stop the bleeding." Davies glared, his jaw clenched. "Miller, are you deaf?" I said no. "That's an order. We're stretched thin. You want to waste precious medical supplies on a Japanese soldier? Think about the boys who died fighting her kind." The words hung heavy in the humid air, a stark reminder of the brutal realities of the conflict. But Tommy's gaze remained fixed on the dying woman. He thought of his mother, a nurse during the Spanish flu epidemic, who taught him that suffering knew no nationality. He thought of the Hippocratic Oath, even if he hadn't formally taken it, the unspoken creed of every healer. He looked at the woman again, her breath now barely perceptible. The decision was made. He would act. He would ignore the warnings, defy the orders, and face the consequences. He had 8 minutes, maybe less, to prove that humanity could still exist amidst the savagery of war. The next 8 minutes unfolded in a blur of focused intensity, a desperate dance against death. Tommy barked orders at a junior corpsman, Private Jenkins, whose eyes were wide with apprehension. "Get me a plasma unit, fast, and sterile gauze, lots of it, scalpel, clamps, sutures, now." Jenkins hesitated, glancing at Lieutenant Davies, who stood rigid, a storm brewing on his face. "Move, Private!" Tommy snapped, his voice cutting through the tension. Jenkins scrambled, his loyalty to the medic overriding his fear of the officer. The makeshift operating area was a small, sweltering corner of the tent, illuminated by a single, flickering kerosene lamp that cast dancing shadows. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and the acrid scent of antiseptic. The woman, Akiko Tanaka, as Tommy would later learn, lay utterly still, her skin clammy and cold, her lips a faint blue. Her pulse was thready, almost imperceptible. Her blood pressure was plummeting. She was in profound hypovolemic shock. Tommy worked with a surgeon's precision, his hands moving with an almost instinctive speed. He tore open her tunic, exposing the ragged wound. It was worse than he'd initially thought, a likely through-and-through injury with significant internal bleeding. He quickly established an IV line, the needle finding a collapsed vein with practiced ease, and started the plasma flowing, a precious, life-giving fluid. "Keep that pressure up, Jenkins," he commanded as the corpsman squeezed the plasma bag. His fingers, surprisingly gentle yet firm, explored the wound. He could feel the warmth of fresh blood pooling. He needed to find the source, and fast. With a small, sharp scalpel, he carefully extended the incision, his brow furrowed in concentration. The tent was silent save for the woman's shallow gasps, the rhythmic drip of the plasma, and the distant, muffled sounds of the camp. Lieutenant Davies remained, a silent, disapproving sentinel, but he did not intervene. Perhaps a morbid curiosity or a grudging respect for Tommy's audacity held him rooted. Tommy located a lacerated vessel, likely an artery, spurting blood. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his hands remained steady. He clamped it, the small metal instrument a beacon of hope in the bloody cavity. Then, with meticulous care, he began to suture, his movements economical and precise. He had assisted in countless field surgeries, learning from the best, and now every lesson, every observation, every instinct was brought to bear. He used a simple running stitch, his focus absolute, blocking out the heat, the smell, the disapproving stares. He checked her vitals again. Still critical, but the plasma was beginning to make a difference. Her pulse, though weak, was a little stronger. Her breathing, still shallow, was less ragged. He packed the wound with sterile gauze, applying firm pressure, hoping to stem any remaining capillary oozing. He administered a broad-spectrum antibiotic, a shot in the arm, a small prayer for preventing infection in this hostile environment. The 8 minutes stretched into an eternity, then snapped shut. He had done all he could with the limited resources. He had stopped the major bleeding, stabilized her circulation, and given her a fighting chance. He stepped back, his uniform stained with blood, sweat dripping from his brow. He looked at Akiko, her chest now rising and falling with a slightly more regular rhythm. She was still in grave danger, but she was alive. He had bought her time. The tent remained silent, the only sound the woman's fragile breathing, a testament to a life snatched from the jaws of death. A heavy silence descended upon the makeshift operating area as Tommy Miller stepped back, his hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline and exhaustion. Akiko Tanaka, the Japanese POW, was still critically ill, but she was breathing, her pulse now a faint but discernible rhythm. The immediate crisis had passed. Lieutenant Davies, who had watched the entire procedure with a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration, finally broke the silence. "Miller," he said, his voice low, "you just risked a court-martial for a Jap." There was no anger in his tone now, only a weary acknowledgement of the medic's defiance. "Get her to recovery. Keep a close eye. If she dies, it's on your head." It was not a reprimand, but an implicit acceptance of Tommy's actions, a pragmatic recognition of the outcome. Over the next few days, Akiko's recovery was slow and arduous, a testament to her youth and resilience. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting valiantly against infection and trauma. Tommy, despite his other duties, made sure she received the best care possible, changing her dressings, monitoring her vitals, and ensuring she had adequate fluids and nutrition. When she finally opened her eyes, fully conscious, she stared at him with a mixture of fear and profound confusion. She had expected death, or at best, harsh treatment. Instead, she found herself in a clean cot, being cared for by the very enemy she had been taught to despise. Her initial distrust slowly gave way to a quiet, almost imperceptible gratitude. She spoke little English, and Tommy knew no Japanese, but the language of care transcended the linguistic barrier. The incident, though initially met with skepticism and even resentment by some of the American personnel, began to subtly shift attitudes. Other medics and corpsmen, witnessing Akiko's slow but steady recovery, started to see her not just as an enemy, but as a patient, a human being. The propaganda that painted all Japanese as faceless, fanatical adversaries began to crack, replaced by the undeniable reality of a young woman fighting for her life, saved by one of their own. It was a small, quiet revolution in perspective, born of a single act of compassion. Word of the 8-minute miracle eventually reached higher command, albeit in hushed tones. Major Thompson, the commanding officer, a shrewd and pragmatic man, saw beyond the immediate defiance of orders. He recognized the potential intelligence value. A POW treated humanely was more likely to cooperate, to provide valuable information. It was a cold, calculated assessment, but it aligned with Tommy's humanitarian act. The incident became an unofficial case study, subtly influencing local policy regarding the medical treatment of enemy wounded. While resources remained scarce, there was a quiet directive to ensure basic medical care for POWs, aligning more closely with the spirit, if not always the letter, of the Geneva Conventions. It was a small step, but a significant one, in a war often devoid of such considerations. Akiko, through her slow recovery, became a living testament to this shift. Her initial expectation of a brutal end, a fate she had been prepared for by her own military's doctrine, was starkly contrasted by the unexpected compassion shown by Sergeant Miller. This profound experience challenged her deeply ingrained beliefs about the enemy, sowing seeds of a different understanding of humanity amidst the savagery of war. The American medical ethics, rooted in the universal principle of preserving life, had, in this small corner of Okinawa, transcended the bitter animosity of the conflict, leaving an indelible mark on both the saved and the saviors. The 8-minute miracle on Okinawa, though never officially lauded during the war, became a quiet legend within the medical corps. It was a story whispered among medics, a testament to the enduring power of their oath. Sergeant Thomas Miller's act of defiance, initially a risk to his career, ultimately contributed to a subtle but significant shift in military medical protocols. While formal changes were slow, the incident served as a powerful practical example of the efficacy and moral imperative of providing care to all wounded, regardless of allegiance. It reinforced the idea that medical personnel, even in the crucible of war, operated under a higher ethical standard, a principle that would gradually find its way into more explicit training and guidelines for future conflicts, emphasizing adherence to humanitarian laws of war. After the war, Tommy Miller returned to Iowa, a quiet hero in his own right. The horrors he witnessed never left him, but neither did the profound satisfaction of saving Akiko Tanaka. He didn't seek accolades, but his experience on Okinawa solidified his commitment to healing. He used his GI Bill to attend medical school, eventually becoming a respected family physician in his hometown. He embodied the American spirit of service and compassion, his wartime actions a quiet foundation for a life dedicated to the well-being of his community. He often reflected on Akiko, wondering about her fate, a silent bond forged in the crucible of war. Akiko Tanaka, after her full recovery, was eventually repatriated to Japan. Her story of survival, of being saved by an American medic, was a profound and complex narrative in a nation grappling with defeat and the aftermath of war. She carried the memory of Sergeant Miller's kindness, a stark counterpoint to the devastation she had witnessed. Her experience, though personal, became a quiet symbol of reconciliation for some, a testament to the possibility of humanity even between warring nations. She lived a long life, often sharing her story with those who would listen, emphasizing the unexpected compassion she received. Years later, with the declassification of wartime documents and historical analyses, the incident on Okinawa gained a broader historical context. Historians and military ethicists began to cite such individual acts of courage as crucial, albeit often unacknowledged, factors in the gradual strengthening of adherence to the Geneva Conventions regarding the treatment of prisoners of war. Tommy Miller's decision, initially seen as a rogue act, was retrospectively understood as a vital affirmation of humanitarian principles, demonstrating that American values of equality and compassion could and should transcend the brutal exigencies of conflict. The legacy of compassionate medical care in warfare, exemplified by Tommy Miller's 8-minute miracle, became a cornerstone of modern military medical ethics. It underscored the American ideal that even in the darkest hours, the preservation of life and the recognition of shared humanity remain paramount. It was a powerful demonstration of the can-do spirit, not just in overcoming technical challenges, but in upholding moral courage against overwhelming odds, proving that even a single medic, armed with skill and conviction, could transform a moment of despair into a lasting beacon of hope and a testament to enduring American values. What do you think about Sergeant Miller's incredible act of courage and compassion? In the chaos of war, can one person truly make a difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more untold stories of American heroism, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of history.